SAQ. All right, folks. We are ready to divert our conversation back to the issues at hand. That would be APUSH. On page 8, we were finishing up looking at advantages, disadvantages as we look at the beginnings of the Civil War. And obviously, one of the biggest issues is creating an army for both of these groups. If you remember, in that great recesses of those gray matter in your head, when we were in chapter 16, after the both the Nat Turner and then more specifically John Brown raid, I said, remember this, and my statement was that the South began to form militias. So the South had already, as a result of John Brown's raid and always as a fear of slave revolts, had some types and forms of militias. They called them different names, regulators, the Night Watch, but they had already begun to establish the idea of some kind of armed group of people. So the next step for them in creating armies is not that difficult. The other thing that makes this difficult for, again, I'm going to say their whole name so you get the idea, the Confederate States of America, is that there is not one army. There's the Army of Northern Virginia. There's the Army of Potomac. There's the Army of North Carolina. So when we talk about General Lee surrendering at Appomattox and ending the war, all he could surrender was the Army of Northern Virginia. That's why really that doesn't end the Civil War, if any of you want to ever be that person. And people talk about that because there will be battles fought in the Civil War in North Carolina after the surrender of at Appomattox by General Lee. He can only surrender his army. That should also say to you, that would be really difficult to have a war against one giant army when you are a whole bunch of armies, all governed by other people. Now, General Lee is in charge, like he's the general overall, but all of these armies from all of these states, again, states' rights, are in charge. And if they don't move the troops where they want them to go, if these generals don't all get along, which they did, I'm not insinuating that they did not, but it does make it very difficult because this is not the Confederate States of America army. It's a whole bunch of armies put under one general, and that would be General Robert E. Lee. So that, again, will be difficult. The South, again, is going to rely on volunteers. On page 8, back in our notes, South relied on volunteers. Smaller population meant troops are smaller, and they are much smaller. Confederacy forced to conscript men between the ages of 17 and 50. 50. The United States military has an enlistment of 20 years. I'm talking 2021, 20 years. So that traditionally most men and women are out before they're 40. If any of you have dads that are 50, imagine, and some of your dads might be really physically fit, but a 50-year-old man doing this kind of stuff, not so much. And when you are forced to move in that range into that 50-year-old, it is very telling that you're in a tight spot. Please look at B3. Rich men could hire substitutes or purchase an exemption. And I'm also going to add to that list, if you own more than 300 slaves, you were exempt. Which, again, doesn't exempt a lot of people, but it exempts the people that have the most skin in the game for this war in itself. And as always, our mountain people, they are not going to fight. Mountain people, not going to fight. They are holed up, and they will actually fight whomever comes. So it's not that they're wishy-washy, just they'll come. Don't come up here, don't come up this mountain, don't come on this ridge, don't come in this holler, or you're going to get fired upon. I don't care what uniform you're wearing. I love mountain people. They talk so slow. You just want to say, come on, get it out, say what you're going to say. And they always tell us to slow down. Lord, y'all talk so fast. Well, no, we really don't. You just talk really slow. And again, that will be a small part of this war, again, because there's not a lot of actual fighting in the mountains. Big box around C, African American soldiers in the North. This will be where African Americans will be able to do quite a few things to assert and change the discussion about both emancipation and equality. The time period of which we're at, let's just say 1860, bless you, accepted beliefs, not just because we don't like those groups of people or we're trying to keep people in, but scientific accepted beliefs is the inferiority of women's intelligence. It's not that the idea that we were dumb. It was the idea that we couldn't learn, which is why we learn things like paintings and don't fill your brain with that kind of stuff. The same things for African Americans, that they were incapable, that would be a better word, that women were incapable of the same intelligence as men, and that people with dark skin were also incapable. That was an accepted belief, sadly, by women as well. It will be, just spoiler alert, interesting in this course of our history to find out how many women worked just as hard for women not to have rights as women. Yes. Oh, honey, yes. We don't have an equal rights amendment because of a woman, not because of anything else. Her name is Phyllis Schley. I can't even hardly say her name out loud. That's 1970s. Oh, if those of you that are looking for other things to watch to fill your mind with intelligence and not just goofy stuff to watch, I think it's on Hulu. I think it's called Mrs. America. It's just 8 shows. I think they're about an hour each. It's phenomenal. It is so good. And I enjoyed it immensely. I watched it twice. But back to our notes. About 180,000 blacks will serve in Union armies. About 10% of the total enlistment. 10%. That's fairly large. That's almost probably, United States military is probably now about 30%. But if you consider at that time period, that's a sizable percentage of the military. Most come from slave states. And essentially what's really significant about that is, and when you think about the courage of these African American soldiers participating in a war that they knew if they were captured, they were going to be back into slavery, right? So that's a significant part of the courage and bravery of these units of African American soldiers that marched down south. Most often they volunteered. They volunteered for those deployments, those missions that sent them into the South, because they wanted to be the ones that were there to help free slaves when they took over certain states. Black volunteers, again, initially are going to be rejected by the Union Army as well. And the idea for more soldiers and emancipation opened the door to black volunteers. They were used, quite honestly, in the worst situations. They were put into situations most often where there was not a potential or a hope for them to win the battle. They were used for diversionary tactics. They were used to, quite honestly, in no other way to say that, just to thin out the Confederate troops, not with a strategy of winning, not with a strategy of moving, but contrary to many of those situations they were put in, they will perform honorably and above and beyond what the high command thought that they would. Please look at C4. Lincoln later claimed the Union's victory was largely due to the impact of black regiments. Please highlight that. That is grossly important and cannot be overemphasized. It has been something that has been placed in the back burner, and obviously it's because of what's going to happen in the 1910s and 1920s again to our country when we rewrite the Civil War and make it a glorious cause for our heritage and our rights. And that heritage and rights was to own slaves. That's it. And I would challenge all of you, anytime people want to talk about that in the South, it's our heritage. It's just our history. And your history is what? Owning slaves. Everybody drinks sweet tea. It's not a Southern thing anymore. We still have weird things, just like every other place has weird things in their heritage. But when people use that code word about heritage, the only heritage that we have that separates us from the rest of the United States of America is the institution of slavery. And again, I am saying that as a Southern person. Through and through, every DNA in my body is a Southern DNA strand. My North Carolina family still don't think of Texas people as Southern, but boy, my Texas family thinks that they're Southern. So Confederacy will not enlist slaves until a month before the war's ended. And again, obviously, that is not something they want to do. I cannot imagine what the thought process is, hey, let's put guns in these hands of these people that we owned and beat and chopped off their hands and sold their children and raped their women. Hey, let's give them some guns and tell them to fight. But slaves are used mostly in the same capacity of what they had been used as slaves. Labor battalions, building fortifications, supplying armies, and again, didn't always do that very well, right? If I am a slave and I see the anticipation, if this Southern war thing goes bad and the North takes over, that I'm out of I will no longer be enslaved. I don't believe that for anybody's thought that they would work hard. Ironically, slaves didn't revolt, and the reason they don't revolt is at that point the thought process is they don't have any understanding of what the outcome is going to be. So they're kind of stuck in between a spot of, do we do this and potentially things could get worse, and so kind of hold off on that as well. It will be the same thing when we get to the end of the Civil War, when the slaves are free. We have our amendment that says slavery is outlawed. There will be very few slaves that leave the South, and we'll discuss why that is as well. Your thought might be, it would be like, let's get out of this place, let's leave this place, but we'll discuss again why that doesn't happen. Indian Territory is going to side with Confederacy, and again, that has more to do with a place value than it does with any kind of ideology. So at the top of page 9 is where this stuff gets really unfun. I don't like talking about all the financial aspects because we're getting ready to get into some money issues. Financial aspects to the Civil War. First, we have to have money. We will establish the first income tax in the nation's history, relatively small, but will raise millions. It will only last during the Civil War, and it will go away. Excise taxes on tobacco and alcohol will be substantially increased by taxes. Those excise taxes on tobacco and alcohol will begin something that hangs around for a long time. These excise taxes are sometimes called sin taxes, and it's a way, again, for government to get money that most people don't have a problem with. I don't smoke. I don't drink. So every year when the taxes go up on those things, I'm like, glory, hallelujah, raise the price of those cigarette packs. Just saying, this is how weird things are. So as a kid, and I mean this honestly, like for real, my parents, my parents used us to do a lot of things that children should not do, like work. Those of you that have parents that give you a lot of chores, I hear you. One of the things that my parents did not like to do is get out of the car. They did not like to get out of the car. So we would pull up to some place and we would be told, run in and get me this. Okay. I'm 10 years old running in to get. So back then, so I was 10 in 1974. In 1974, I could, and this is on base, I could run into and then we called it the little store. I don't know what the name of it is. I could run into the little store and buy my dad a carton of Winston cigarettes. They would sell a whole carton of cigarettes to a 10-year-old. Everybody did this. My husband, who lived in Southern California, that was 10, would have to ride his bike to the Circle K. This was his mom's list. A TV guide, hard candy, and Salem Menthol Light 100s. That's what he would ride his bicycle with his banana seat and a sissy bar to the Circle K through their gang neighborhood. He would take darts with him because people would stop and throw darts at him to get him away because he lived in a very sketchy neighborhood. So people would sell. So here's what I remember. That giant carton, which has 12 packs of cigarettes in 1974, was probably about $4. In the late 80s, by then, my parents, who was I buying cigarettes for in 1980s? Not my mom. Who was that? My neighbor. Okay. Back then, it goes up to, I think it was like $5 or $6 a carton again. Now, when I go and look over the prices, hi Kendra, I do. A Band-Aid or what? Yes, it's okay. So then, when I go look in the, you can take it to the back. Oh, you just leave it right there. I think one pack of cigarettes is more than all those cartons. That's an excise tax, and the same with alcohol. And usually the first of the year is when governments will add that. So again, huge money for those income tax. The other part is, again, a tariff. Raise the tariff to about 10%. And then we get to this weird thing in the middle of page 9. If you ever wanted to know why, and I don't know that old people, anybody calls except old people, greenbacks is our money. So we're finally getting to the point where we have money that's going to kind of sort of look like money that we have today. They're still big. They're still probably about that big. The paper still feels like real paper. But the government will issue about 450 million greenbacks to replace gold. So coins were gold. They were difficult to haul around, which is why people didn't do it. That's why, again, we've talked about banknotes. So what you would have done if you were a person that had any means, you would have taken your money, your gold coins, deposited in a bank. The bank would have given you a banknote that said, this person has a deposit of this much money in our bank. And it would have been kind of like a letter. We call that now a letter of credit, like for people that do business. But that would have been what you would have carried around. So if you went to go buy something, you would have purchased a suit, showed the haberdasher your letter of credit. They would have filled out a invoice, and they would have sent the invoice to the bank to be paid, not to you. So it's kind of a switchy around thing, because who could carry gold in your pockets, right? That's not a thing. So we exchanged those gold coins for paper for the first time. When you think about, again, the idea of paper just being worth something, we had to give it some symbolic. And this is what these greenbacks become. They're supported by gold. So every greenback that was issued, there was gold in Fort Knox. If those of you that are any of you coin collectors or money collectors or have people in your family that do that, there are lots of things that float around. Like there are $2 bills that are called silver certificates, and those things have extra there's still certain coins that are minted before a certain time period that have a higher level of silver in them. So all of these coin things will change throughout the time. So greenbacks will be issued. We'll talk about those a lot. I think I have this question on a quiz about greenbacks every time, and I have the goofiest, stupid answers for it. Like, it's Irish people. It's people who were the beginnings of the conservative movement. Please don't choose those answers. It's dollars that are in your wallet that are what color? Green. I don't know why that question's so. Yes, it's greenbacks. That's where, we have a gazillion names for money, right? But greenbacks held on for a long time. And is it still bread these days? Or are we past bread? Like, get that bread, get that money. Here's the thing. Before that, it was dough. Like, when I was a kid, it was dough. Like, yeah. So we went from the dough to the actual bread. Anyway, never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about. The next one is number 5, sale of bonds. We will do this in almost every war, sell war bonds. And again, the war bonds are just like any other type of bond. You're going to pay a face value of that. You're going to pay $25 for that war bond. You're going to hold on to it. It will come to full face value in 10 years or 15 years. And please remember this name, Jay Cook. He is going to be quite possibly the biggest crook, Mr. Cook, in the history of Treasury secretaries. He is going to send us into a horrific panic, depression, all kinds of things. He is a bad, bad dude. And so on page 9, finally, in 1863, almost 90 years after Alexander Hamilton is saying, we need a banking system, we get one, the national banking system. It's going to be authorized by Congress in 1863. Here is a sidetrack. You can write it here, but you need to make sure that you're putting it somewhere else. All this stuff that we're being talked about passing in Congress, Congress is made up of just Northerners at this point, right? It's just people from the North. There's going to be a fast and furious passing of laws and bills in Congress because it is of like-minded people. It's just everybody in the North. And I'm not sure that that's something that usually comes to people's mind when they talk about the Civil War, but there is a lot of congressional action going on, a lot. It is, again, bless you, one of the reasons the 13th Amendment is easy to get through. It's one of the things that takes the southern states a long time to get back into the Union because they have to agree to all that stuff that happened while they were not participating in the government. So the national banking system is authorized in 1863, probably because it had never been able to be authorized before because the South would not have agreed to it at all. Because it is designed, please look at 6A, to issue a standard bank note currency. No longer Virginia money and Indiana money and this currency and that currency. We now have one.
Could you trade in your money?
I'm not sure. That is not something. I have minimal financial history of the United States. Minimal. Mostly because I don't like it. They sold government bonds. Banks that joined the national banking system could buy bonds and issue sound money backed. So that might be the answer, okay. Right? And this will begin our solid banking system that will be further propped up by Wilson, that will be further propped up by FDR. The reason the Great Depression happens in 1929 is we don't have a sound banking system. There just isn't one. And as a nation, we were really, really fortunate that we were able to get through as long as we did without having what happened in 1929, crash and burn. But we're trying. And again, for this time period, what helped is that there aren't any Southerners. This will be the first real national bank since Jackson killed it. It's going to last for 50 years until the Federal Reserve System. And the Federal Reserve System doesn't do away with this national banking system. It just makes it better. And when we get the Federal Reserve, again, we get stability. We get our country divided into like districts, banking districts. For any of you that that have a checking account, which in these days, I'm sure all of you have checking accounts, but do any of you have checks? Do any of you? You actually have, I know why you have a check. Because your mom makes you, because that's what we do. Anyway. Yeah. So if you don't know how to write a check, please make sure you learn how to write a check, because someday you're going to have to write a check. But anyway, if you do anything online other than always entering your debit card number, sometimes you actually have to enter checking account. And the very first number is it's called a routing number. If you've ever looked at a check, the bottom of the check, there's all these weird like zeros and dots and kind of computer generated numbers. The back part of the number is your account number. The front part of the number is the routing number. And if you give that routing number to banks or to any financial system, they automatically know where you're at in the United States. So if we give our routing number to any banking institution, they automatically know we're in the Midwest. The United States is divided into, I think it's nine financial districts. And in each one of those, there is a head bank that has nothing to do with Fifth Third, First Financial, credit unions, anything. It's a bank that's in charge of each of that. That's where all of our stuff goes. That will be the Federal Reserve System that we had finally figured out. With most of all that stuff is still Hamilton's suggestions from back in the day. Southern finances are horrific. They are, again, at the mercy because they are Confederate states. They do not have a strong central government. They do not believe in a central government. Every one of these states is fighting for themselves, despite what it may seem on the outside. Customs are going to cut off. Custom duties are all cut off. So they're getting nothing of their customs for the ships that come in and drop stuff off. They can't get anything out. They cannot ship out any cotton because France and Britain are honoring the blockade. They are not going to do anything to provoke any attempt at war with the Union by crossing that blockade. Government issued lots of bonds, over 400 million. I have already told you the story, the one summer that my sister and I found all the Confederate money in my granny's old trunk, and we thought we were rich. Like, we really thought, like, Granny has forgotten. She put all this money in. And it's because they just printed stuff. And my granny, well, Lord, that might buy you a stick of gum. Yeah, it was a lot of money, a ton of Confederate money. And it was worth nothing. And for the most part, even during the war, it was worth nothing. Significant raise in taxes, 10% on farm products. Most states' right Southerners hated tax, again. The biggest source of their revenue is they just print some money. And as a result, there will be runaway inflation. So what happens when you print a lot of money? The price of things go up. And by 1863, a pound of coffee was about $50. $50. I'm not buying a pound of coffee for $50 in 2021. Number one, I don't drink coffee, so I really don't care. But let's just make it a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew, something I would have trouble. I would not buy a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew for $50. I would not. That's my line in the sand, $50. And that's what happens when you print a lot of money. It becomes worthless. And that's what the South has done. They have put themselves in a situation where their money is worthless. Next, on the top of page 10, It's where we'll try to get finished with that top part. This C, all of that, again, has to do with the fact that the North has complete, total control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Complete, total control. And again, they are going to do all kinds of things. Civil War is going to produce our first millionaire class in U.S. history. And when I mean millionaires, I mean millionaires. By the end of the Civil War, Mr. Morgan is going to have more money than the federal government. The federal government will go to his bank to borrow money. Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, all of these people are going to come out of the Civil War. Mrs. Vanderbilt spent in the 1870s and 80s $6,000 a week on fresh flowers. In 1870, $6,000 a week on fresh flowers. Because what do you do with fresh flowers at the end of the week? You throw them away. You get more. Vanderbilt, again, when you have so much money that you can build your own college, that'd be Vanderbilt. You got a lot of money. And Vanderbilt's, again, will hang out for a long time. Those of you that are watch any TV, Anderson Cooper on CNN, he's a Vanderbilt. He is a rich Vanderbilt dude. Actually, I don't think he's rich. I don't think his mom left him any money. But they're rich, and they're coming out of this. And they're coming out of this by the stuff they make. Railroads, money, beginning of the Gilded Age, again, we'll do that. Much dishonesty. We're going to produce labor-saving machinery. So this, again, is this second industrial revolution that we're going to have that's going to explode in the Gilded Age. We're building sewing machines, reapers, petroleum. 3 is a question that gets asked a lot because I don't think many people think when we think about oil, do we think of the great state of Pennsylvania? But if you think about oil in the sense of like motor oil to use for your vehicles and not just always gas, like Quaker State, that's what that oil is. That's going to be found in 18. And then we've got this next group of Western movement. So one of the things that had stopped movement west was that, what are we going to do about slavery? If we move west, what are we going to do about slavery? Well, now that's off the table. It doesn't matter. So now we have these giant movements west, and we're going to do, the first is the Homestead Act of 1862. We won't talk about it a lot in this chapter. We'll get it in our next chapter. Provided free land to pioneers headed west, and that will be the states of like North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho. You head out that way, you live there for 5 years, you get 160 acres for free. Sounds like a great deal, but less than about a third of the people made it. And that's a generous third. Most people didn't even make it a year. First of all, most of these people had no idea how to farm. Second of all, 160 acres does not make a farm. It just barely gives you sustaining. And third of all, it is Montana. It snows in August. These people were not fit for that. But it does make them head west. About 20,000 people had moved west. And again, without the idea of having this, what are we going to do? Free state, slave state. Gold people are going to head out that way. For us, what's really, really important is C, the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862 will give Indiana the new Agricultural and Mechanical College of Purdue University. That is where the founding of Purdue is from, that 30,000 acres of public lands for each senator and congressman. And please, out to the side, each state received 30,000 acres of public lands for each senator and congressman in Congress. That's all northern people in our border states, right? So every northern state got 30,000 acres free to establish a college that financed agriculture and mechanics. And this is where in our next chapters, we are going to explode with agriculture, because now we're treating agriculture as a science. And it's going to, again, have a drastic change. And please, again, that idea of colleges like Purdue. Now, what's going to happen when states start coming back into the union? That's going to be one of the things that Congress holds up as a, hey, you might want to come back, because if you come back and you do all these things, and there's a lot of things they have to do, you're going to get this land, and it will eventually go back, except this time the South, or the Northern Congress says, and you have to make universities for African Americans. So that's where colleges like North Carolina A&T will come, agriculture and technical, and will come into play as a result of that. And then the Pacific Railway. The South desperately wanted that railway to go through the South. That's how all of this discussion with Stephen Douglas and where the railroad's going to be all started. Well, guess what? There are no Southern senators. And now we're going to have that Pacific Railway go where we want it to go, and we want it to go north. So it's going to start in and around Missouri. It's going to start in Missouri on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, it's going to start in San Francisco, and they're just going to build across and meet in Promontory Point in Utah in 1863. And surprise, surprise, the tracks line up. It's fairly impressive that you can build this gigantic railroad. The West is going to have to build through the Rocky Mountains. The East starting point is going to have to go through desolate places like Kansas, without computers, without calculators, without communication. They're going to end up at the same place. It's fairly significant and really important. All right.